Okie dokie. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the Public Practice Accountants Club, a space for leaders and emerging leaders in the accounting space to come together and connect over the unique challenges and opportunities faced by our industry. Be at the forefront of transformation in the industry, make valuable connections, and hear some great conversations. And of course, the bonus is that you get your CPD points for tuning in. So our topic this morning is how to manage tricky conversations with your team and overcome a fear of conflict. So I'll introduce myself very quickly first. Hello, everybody. I'm Linda Steffens, the accountant coach, author, and speaker. I particularly love to talk about the business of accounting, business advisory services, and leadership in public practice. And of course, my amazing co-host is with me again this morning, Kyelie Baxter. Good morning.
Good morning, Linda. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, yes, my name is Kyelie Baxter. I own a public practice accounting firm located here on the Gold Coast. Someone pointed out to me recently on LinkedIn, of all places, that I have been in business for 20 years this year.
Wow,
so
congratulations.
That was nice. It's a funny thing because, this year I really wanted to focus on celebrating success, and yet I missed this massive milestone. So thank you, Heather, for pointing that out if you ever see this. But what I was raising that for is because over those many, many years of being an employer and a business owner and also engaging with clients in that advisory space, I've had the opportunity to have a lot of these difficult conversations. So do come with a lot of thoughts, some knowledge, and lots of opinions about today's topic.
Me too, Kyelie. I've been hanging around public practice for 30 years and been in business a long time myself. And yes, absolutely. You do have to have these tricky conversations from time to time. And good morning, Linda. Thank you for tuning in. So as accountants, we often struggle through difficult conversations with our clients because we have no choice. So clients, no choice. However, when it comes to our own firm or our team, we tend to avoid confrontation at all costs. So most of us hope the issue will resolve itself, but that's rarely the case. And the longer the conversation remains unspoken, the more resentment tends to build and the more difficult it becomes to actually start the conversation. So avoiding conflict, or we'll get into this as well, perceived conflict, because often the idea of conflict is much worse than the reality. Avoiding that impacts our team culture and workplace productivity. There's no doubt about that. Over time, it has a negative effect on everything really, but definitely on profitability. Conflict is inevitable wherever people work together, but difficult conversations actually don't have to be a nightmare. So let's chat about navigating these difficult conversations with your team and hopefully staying on top of any drama in the workplace. So exactly that, uncomfortable conversations, inevitable wherever a group of people are working together. So learning how to navigate them is very, very important for healthy relationships. And to be honest, it's the responsibility of yourself as a leader or a manager to have them, to start them, and to empower others to do the same. So that's where I'm starting off. And I think the first point that I'll dive into, Kyelie, if I may, is investing the time. That's crucial, isn't it, really?
Yeah, look, I think it's one of those things that, there's two options, right? Do something or do nothing. And if you continually choose that do nothing approach, but there is an issue that needs to be resolved, then it's going to raise its ugly head at an inopportune time. Whereas if we harness our power and take control of the situation and take that difficult conversation at a time that's more suitable, not only will it not blow up, because that's what happens, but also it's likely to resolve itself fully or, even partially, which is a step towards success. Because I think you mentioned a really important point, Linda, in sort of your intro, which is if we avoid these difficult conversations, it will have an effect on profitability. And I think people forget that.
Yes.
They just think, oh, it's okay. I don't want to, deal with this. So I would like to sort of flag why the conversation is difficult in the first place. Maybe if we can also just start in that area.
Absolutely.
I think difficult conversations are difficult because people are worried about mostly the emotional perspective of how that's going to go. Is the other person going to respond, or the group of people? How are we going to handle that conversation ourselves?
Yes.
And a lot of the time it revolves around having to give feedback, regardless of whether, if we look at it in a business sense, whether you're the employee or the employer. So having to give feedback that might be unwanted, unexpected, and you're really worried about how that person is going to react in this conversation. And I think that's why things are difficult.
Yes.
Even when we put it to a client perspective, where
Same.
accountants think about the obvious one, and there's been this massive uproar, and I've been watching it with fascination about tax return outcomes, right?
Yes.
We don't do hardly any individual returns anymore. And I'll confess to you, it's the 2nd of August. We're yet to lodge an individual tax return for 2023. So that's not our forte. Well, it works for our business model.
Yes.
It's not our forte. But I'm watching my colleagues and friends have to break this really bad news to clients. And it's a real array of emotions, right? Like on some aspects, it's like, well, it's right. So they just need to tolerate it.
Yes.
Other people, are really more sympathetic about it. Other people started sympathetic and now they're at the other end. It's really interesting. But I think that, breaking to an individual client that you might only interact with once a year, your tax refund's gone and actually you owe money, which is the case for a lot of people, is an example of one of these difficult conversations, and really clearly points out, what I'm saying about you're worried about the reaction of the other person.
Absolutely. And I can give a little bit of insight into that from, let's say, the coach perspective. And, I've been looking at the personalities and profiles of accountants for over 15 years now. And one thing that is very apparent is that we have, for the most part, a very supportive communication style. And what that means is that we will always put others first and always consider others' emotions, feelings, reactions, everything that you've just been saying there, Kylie, which plays on our mind and can sometimes just get the better of us. So if we can understand that about ourselves, that's who we are, that's naturally how we're going to react, and just go, I accept that, I get that, let's just take 5 minutes and move past that, because I need to look at the good outcomes that will result as having this difficult conversation. So that's the first thing. Yes, you wanted to say something?
So you're saying that generally accountants are empathetic? Sorry, what were you saying? Basically that we will put the other person first. Now, I assume that comes because we're automatically working in a service-related industry where we help people. So that comes back to that.
Yes, it does. It's just a classic communication style. If anyone has done anything in disc profiling, that is the classic style that comes up in 9 out of 10 accountants that I see. And I think that you would actually see it in other professional services as well, because you're right, we're service-based people. So we're naturally focused on other people. And, that style, if we can understand what it is and how to use it and leverage it, and then just accept that's who we are, that's how we're going to react, then we've got a much better chance of looking at it in our reality. What do we need to do? And then make a really informed choice about what we do next, which in most cases, what we're saying here is don't avoid this difficult conversation with your team member, because it's going to have some perhaps even long lasting impact, not only on you, on your business, but also on other team members. And I don't know about you, Kylie, but I've certainly been in organizations where there has been toxic employees, team members, and the outcomes from them are phenomenal and long lasting. They go on and on even after that team member has left. So this is something you don't you don't want to avoid. But I think the point I was making too about time, we can get so wrapped up in doing everything we're doing, and we're busy and there's lots of work to do. It's like, oh gosh, I can't deal with that right now. I've got to do this thing for the client, or I've got to do this thing for somebody else, or I've got to run off and do this meeting that's booked in my calendar. So I think there's also got to be an acceptance and a realization when we have team members, other people around us, that the demands on our time changes. And it's really important that we set aside some time, or at least the awareness that we need to spend some time with our team. Whether that's talking to them on a regular basis, whether it's having to have these difficult conversations in a timely manner, whatever that is, I think we need to look at that. And I don't know that as professionals, as technicians in an industry, that we really consider that.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I think particularly that's relevant where the person that needs to have that difficult conversation or needs to show the leadership there is not actually affected by the problem or by the feedback, the area of the feedback.
Doesn't rock our boat. Yes.
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
And that's where that toxicity can come from, particularly in, I was going to say larger teams, but, it can happen in a group of 4 or 5.
Easy.
You might have the owner of the business that's, doing their thing. They're so busy, they're flat out. And it's, your undergrad accountant and your receptionist that are having this issue of who owns what and what part of the job should I be doing and what part of the job should you be doing. And I've seen it over and over where business owners just sort of go, they need to sort it out themselves. It's not my problem. That, they'll do some sort of group, everyone needs to work together and wear a team spiel and think problem solved. And it's just not, right?
No.
Like, this is the thing exactly that we're talking about. You need to really ascertain with each and every situation that arises, how do I need to deal with it? Do I actually need to have a specific conversation with these people? Because you know what, in some aspects, having a bit of a, hey, we're a team, you need to work together if you've got a problem sorted out with each other, that will work in some situations. But in others, it so won't, and I could give you a million examples of where that hasn't worked. But I think really what I would love to come out of today is maybe like a 4 or 5-step process of practical, how we can, what are the 5 steps to having difficult conversations in the office?
Yes. And I think the first one, which we've been talking about, is don't ignore them. So that's the first thing. As we've just been saying, it perpetuates the discomfort, it erodes or breaks relationships. And there's that thing of perceived conflict. And we've all had it in our lives before. We worry and stress about things, and then we actually build up the courage or the momentum to actually do it, and then go, that wasn't as bad as I thought. Look at that. So I think we're very thought-provoking people as well. And so we like to analyze and bring a lot of detail. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? And that just builds up that perceived conflict even further. Another point I'll make here too is that we will be feeling all of these things. So will our team members, because it's very likely that they have a similar communication style. They're very detailed orientated. They're perceiving conflict as well. So everything you're feeling, they're probably feeling as well. So don't ignore them either.
Yeah, so don't ignore the conversation. Then you get to a road check where you're like, okay, I know I've got to have this conversation.
Yes.
And before we even talk about how you do it or where you do it or how, what the details are, I think you need to address whether you're going to set this meeting up in advance or if you're going to do it in a more casual environment.
Yes.
Now, I personally don't think that there's a right or wrong, and I think that each situation needs to be considered separately.
Yes.
But what I will say is, if you set the meeting in advance, you need to think about the reaction of the person regarding that as well. Because if you set a random meeting in advance and don't tell them what it's about, they're going to wonder.
There's that perceived conflict coming right back at you. Yes.
But what actually happens is it's perception from both ways.
Yes.
So we might be like, right, I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to hit this on the head. I'm going to make a meeting with them for next Monday. Friday's not the best day to have meetings.
No.
It's Thursday now. We'll do it on a Monday. That'll be great.
Yes.
You know what that person does all weekend? They stew.
Yes.
And they will, really think about the conversation. And not all the time, but a lot of the time. What do they want? What are they going to say? If they say this, then I'm going to say this. Da, 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 da. So you really need to make a good strategic choice about whether you're going to pull someone aside and have a chat with them ad hoc, even if it's not ad hoc to you, or if you're going to set a meeting in advance. And my hot tip would be, if you are going to set a meeting in advance, give them an agenda or some structure about the conversation. I think that is the fair thing to do. What do you think, Linda?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I was just, as I was researching, I've sort of come up with 5 rules, and that first one was don't ignore them, and the second one was to complete them in a timely manner. And cool. I was also reading about some conversation styles and how you might use these different styles in different circumstances, depending on what you're needing to talk about. And I think this, do them in a timely manner. And you mentioned there's no right or wrong. I don't think there's a right or wrong either. I think it depends on the situation. If it's something that I was reading about, an accommodating style where you actually give in to what's happening, but you're raising the point, and they recommended that this is a really good style to use where you're happy to lose the battle but want to win the war. So if that makes sense to people. So it's like, hey, Kyelie, I just noticed that you did this yesterday afternoon. I quickly just caught that conversation. Look, we'd really like to talk to clients in this way, or talk to our team members in that way. I understand why you did it, but, please let's just, I'd rather it sort of happen the other way next time. So something like that, it seems really quite offhanded, seems very spontaneous, but you've probably had, 8 to 12 hours to think about that, and it's not something that you need to set up this meeting around that can create that other, tension. But that's just those smaller things. I think you can deal with them that way. And again, there's no right or wrong. So yeah, absolutely. Do them in a timely manner. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that with them. Yeah. Yep.
100%. Even, with client matters and issues, let's say you wanted to call a client in and talk to them about something new, maybe some professional services issues that they might be having, or whatever the story is, maybe some new legislation. You need to give the client some context when you call them into a meeting, because if you don't, they think something terrible has happened, which is so off course, and you worry them, give them some anxiety for no point. Right. So, yeah. So we've decided to have the conversation. We've figured out how we're going to do it. We might grab someone casually. We might set up an appointment, have a meeting. Then what do we do, Linda?
What are we going to talk
about?
How
do we prepare?
Yes. So I love going out and looking at some great resources around this, and I've always really admired Simon Sinek's work, and he's got a little video exactly on this, having difficult conversations. So just go out and Google Simon Sinek and difficult conversations, and it'll come up. It's only 3 minutes or something. It's very worthwhile the watch. And one of the points that he mentions in there is to acknowledge the discomfort right at the start, right up front, and basically saying something like, I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you, and, just move on from there. So please bear with me while I try to get this out. So, these types of statements. Please be patient with me. It's important that I have this conversation with you. I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing, so please bear with me. Those types of statements, I think, are very disarming and relaxing and acknowledging, I'm finding this difficult too, so let's just relax and talk about this. That was his recommendation anyway.
It's something that I actually use.
Yes.
And it's a real icebreaker for people, particularly when they know, I've been not performing so well, or I've done the wrong thing, or, I'm in trouble here. People walk in and it's like ice. Yeah. And if you just say, look, this isn't going to be the best conversation. This is a hard one, but we've got to have it.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk first. please, just hear me out, and then you'll have an opportunity to speak.
Absolutely.
So it really does make people go, okay, yeah, let's do it. And it puts it in a really good frame.
I think, and it puts you on that even playing field. These conversations are not about power trips or, someone lording over somebody else. The best way to have them is in an extremely collaborative style where you're chatting about it and hopefully come up with a win-win situation. If you can deal with them in that way, and even if you've got to use some of that accommodating stuff that I was talking about there before to get to the win-win, then so be it. But it's just so important to start the conversation.
So what you're talking about there, Linda, was one of my points actually, which is a solutions-driven approach.
Absolutely.
So you want to go in knowing what you would like to happen at the end. Okay. So as an example, let's use the tax return situation. The client's got a really poor tax return outcome. You want that client, you don't want them to be happy, because they're not going to be happy. They've got to pay, right? But what do you want? You want them to have an understanding of why. You don't want them to go away saying, well, my accountant did it wrong. I'm going to need to get this done again. You need to get them to understand why. So that's a solutions-driven approach. They're not going to be happy. That's not going to happen, right?
No.
That sucks for us. It's not our fault, but it is what it is. Same with staff. If you're having to deal with some sort of issue in the office, staff might not be happy either, but you need them to understand how it's affecting the rest of the team, what they could do to improve. You've really got to get that solution out there, because there's really very little point just hashing over a problem.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, there's a problem. Oh, okay, thanks. Great. Most people already know that there's a problem, even if they can't articulate it.
Yeah.
So highly recommend a solutions-driven approach, and make sure if you're the one initiating the conversation, you know what your outcome is. Now, that said, there is a small majority of time where it's like, we're not going to solve this today. We're just going to talk about the issue, go away, come back, and that's perfectly fine as well. But you want a solutions-driven approach in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. And I think I've certainly been in a lot of conversations and a lot of meetings where it seems to be this real competitive style where I've got what I think about the situation and somebody else is trying to get us to understand their side. It's not that you don't understand. And, I think that's a good point, is that work out what you sort of want to have happen in the end, because it might not be about you actually agreeing on something as in what's happened, who's right and who's wrong. That's not what this is about. It's about having an open, collaborative conversation about things. And, you may have to take on point, the team member may have some very good points for you, things that you don't even realize. So I think that's another very good point, is to be open and to employ techniques of active listening and, not be so structured about the conversation that you can't bend to another solution either. And I just wanted to say, for those of you listening in, if you've got any questions for us, please type them into the chat. We're happy to take comments and everything there. So we'd love to hear any examples of your tricky conversations as well. And so I think that's the thing, solution driven, but it goes both ways, right?
Solution driven, but it goes both ways. So I think, Linda, it's really important also along that conversation to not assume that the other person is going to either understand or agree with your perspective. So you really need to make sure that you're speaking in a non-emotive, as best as possible, clear and concise manner. You need to make sure that you're also, when we talk about non-emotive, you're not exaggerating, you're not pulling things up from 3 years ago. No. You're pulling recent events up that are particularly relevant to the topic. You also want to make sure that you don't, and I would say everyone would only do this unintentionally, but that you don't challenge someone else's person. No. You don't make comments or assumptions about them personally. Correct. You always blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that you stick to the facts and not the emotion side of it, because that will really drive a much better and more amicable conversation.
Absolutely. You just nailed my rule number 3, Kylie, which is stick to the facts. So absolutely. And I think that leads a little bit into my rule number 4, which is a bit of preparation, which we've already talked about. Preparation, practice, those sorts of things. But, you know, if you want to jot down a few dot points, we're not saying anything about scripting, because just what we've been saying about solution focused, you've got to be able to bend and listen and go with the flow of the conversation. So scripting these things is just out of the question. But a few jot points, because if it's a difficult conversation and you've worked yourself up a little bit, and even though we're trying to keep emotion out of it, sometimes emotion pops up in these types of conversation for both us and perhaps the team member. And that's what can also make them difficult. I'll raise a point about that in just a second. But, you know, if you've got those few jot points down, then you'll be sure to be able to get out what you feel like you need to be able to say, even if there's a little bit of emotion in the room. Now, dealing with emotion, let's talk about that, because that's something I think, again, through my research and looking at the accountant profile, that emotion's not something we're particularly comfortable with. I think in general, you know, it's difficult for the majority of the human race when it comes to these types of conversations, but it's particularly sticky for us with a particular communication style. So we're very detailed, facts-driven people because of the work that we do. We're just, you know, often when it comes to our tax and our accounting, they're facts, they're figures, they have no emotion, and we're very comfortable there. People are messy, they're emotional, they take time, and that's where, you know, it conflicts actually with another strong communication style that we see generally in the accounting population.
How many times have you heard someone say to you, I'm not having that conversation with that person, they're going to cry?
Yes. So many
It's a
times.
funny statement. It's a funny statement, but one that you actually hear a lot. Or, oh, I knew they were going to cry. Like, you know what? These are real people. We're dealing with real people. I keep tissues in my boardroom because clearly I make my clients cry all the time. No, I don't. But it's for the in case of emergency where people will have an unexpected or potentially expected emotional response. You need to, as the leader or the initiator in this conversation, think to yourself, if that happens, how am I going to handle that? Now, anyone can feel uncomfortable with emotion from somebody else, but I think also there's pros and cons for both ways. And I don't want to stereotype, but I think, you know, the male gender particularly, those that have worked in the industry for a long time really feel uncomfortable if anybody cries in front of them in a conversation. But maybe, you know, sort of the people that have come up more recently into our profession are way more comfortable with any sort of outburst. The pros and cons are this. Sometimes if someone has an unexpected emotional outburst, it will break the ice, soften the conversation, really diffuse the situation. But the consequence of that is that then sometimes the initiator of the conversation, I'll say, goes a little bit soft in what they wanted to deliver. So you walk out of there and you go, oh, that didn't work out how I wanted, because I wanted to say all of these things.
It went sideways,
right?
Yes.
I wanted to say all of these things, and then I didn't feel like I could, and now the problem has not been resolved. And the other person goes away thinking, oh, that's great, it's all done. We never have to talk about that again.
So what are some of the tips with it? Because, you know, emotion, I step back to, you know, my early years in management and when I was first dealing with people, and emotion made me very uncomfortable. And, you know, look, it still makes me uncomfortable, but I think now, having done so many of these conversations and dealt with a lot of people, I'm much able to navigate it myself. And, you know, that's come through a whole lot of personal development on my part, through a lot of other coaching and, you know, learning that I've done around the subject to manage people. So I think that's something we can't ignore either. Is, look, if we're feeling uncomfortable about some of these things, let's lean on one of these strengths that we have, which is learning. We're very, very good at that. And, I think we can go out and there's a lot more that we can learn that's going to enhance our businesses, our profession, our careers, the whole lot. So don't underestimate that. But I've always had a few little tips with, particularly managing crying. Now, you're welcome to use them if you feel comfortable to. They may not suit you. I have a very self-deprecating style. I use a lot of fun and comedy when not to, when we're having a serious conversation. I obviously don't do that. But if somebody starts to cry, I do think that often we need to realize that crying's often brought about from frustration. So not being able to speak what you really feel. So it comes from frustration. It comes from being in a situation where you want to really say something, but you feel like you can't. So that's why we cry a lot of the time. It's frustration. It is emotion. And, it's not about crying's not about being soft or, anything like that. It's just an expression. And if we can look at it that way, I think it also makes it a little bit easier to deal with. But often too, then what happens is when the person who is experiencing that themselves, the frustration, the crying, they become quite embarrassed. And then you're dealing with embarrassment as well as another emotion. And I often, to diffuse that, I will often say, I'm great with crying. I'll probably just cry with you if that's okay. And they normally then just giggle or something like that, and it completely diffuses the situation. Or it's okay, I'm great with crying, here's the tissues. If you don't want to say, I'll probably cry with you. But often that will bring up, I've been in situations where I've truly felt moved by something that someone's saying. And when it's paired with emotion and physical, reactions to that, I do well up and I have cried, and I think that's okay too. So just go with the flow, I think is the thing. But yeah, that's my little tip. I do try to diffuse it a little bit. I don't know if you've got any tips around that, Kylie.
I do. And I think when we're talking about crying, we should also talk about anger. We're talking about any emotive response, and anger is, which one's better? It depends on your personality, right? It depends on how you are going to perceive this. You need to be prepared for any emotive response. I agree with you, Linda. The diffuse method is great, and there's a variety of ways to do that. A lot of people are not comfortable with crying, so they're not going to be able to say, hey, I'm great with crying. So some other options, or I'm great with anger, keep yelling at me, I love that, like that's so good. So I think one of the things that I like to do if unexpectedly or expectedly people have an emotional reaction, that is not acceptable. And that means that they're really, really crying to the point where they can't listen. That's not acceptable for the conversation. No. Or they really start rambling, or, they start yelling, or they have some sort of response. That's not acceptable for the conversation. And it doesn't mean it's not acceptable behaviour. Crying is certainly acceptable behaviour. In some case, yelling, I'm like, yeah, I get why you're yelling. I'd be yelling too. Yes. But diffusing is good. You might say, hey, this conversation isn't being done in the professional manner in which it needs to be held. Yes. How about what we do is we put a pin in this. You take some time, go for a walk around the block. I'll do the same. Let's come back in 20 minutes. Don't go back to your desk. Take a break. Let's put a pin in this. Perfect. Sometimes you might do that for a day. The problem with leaving it a long time is that often, depending on both parties, it can get worse, not better. Yes, so I only ever really allow a short time frame. I like to deal with things the same day when there's been an emotional, unacceptable reaction from either party. Sometimes the initiator of the conversation finds themselves getting lost as well, and it's like, okay, this is not hang on, this is not going because someone, the other person said something and you've gone off on a tangent. Yeah, well, since you raised that, no, that's where the planning comes in. But I think diffusing is probably, in some way, shape or form, diffusing is the best way. You have to get the conversation back on track because we want to be solutions driven. You've done your plan. You know what you want to say. You need to lead the conversation towards the outcome that's desired. Can I just talk about quickly that emotive reaction, be it
Yes.
crying, anger, or anything in between?
Yes.
Often, too often, I have seen a response to that be, please don't be upset. This isn't personal.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
That's a really common thing for people to say when they're a little bit
Yes.
uncomfortable with any sort of emotional reaction
Yes.
to a conversation. I think we all need to recognize in our everyday lives now, it's 2023, that even when it's not personal to us, it could be
still
personal to
personal.
the other person.
Yes.
And we need to be respectful of that.
Yes.
So no matter how that person reacts, we need to maintain that respectful nature of the conversation, much like we want that person to show respect towards us.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I think that's fabulous. Respect is the number one thing. I think that, if you're trying to have any collaborative conversation, solution focused conversation, respect has to be there on both sides. And, people, we're all human and we're all going to react in different ways depending on any given day. It could be a different reaction for anyone. There's often when we see these reactions too, it's not as a result of the actual conversation we're having. It's a build-up of something else that we're not even aware of. And I think we've got to be very careful of jumping to the conclusion that they're reacting solely to what's happening, in front of them or what's been said, because 9 times out of 10, that's often not the case. So again, I think that comes into your preparation of things, to think about that, take a step back, don't just react to these things, and take your time. But I think, we've been very much talking about the rule number 5, which popped up, which was staying calm, not being aggressive, not being argumentative, and having some sort of way to help diffuse a situation if it does get a little out of hand. And I think going back to step number 1, which was acknowledge the difficulty, you can acknowledge the emotion in the same way. So whether it's diffusing and you do that via acknowledgement, it's like, okay, I can see that this is really affecting you. Thank you for, it's all right, let it out, here's the tissues, whatever it is, or let's just take a break, take a breath, so that we can both try to get out what we need to get out, because emotion will blur the conversation. But we can't stop it. It's part of human nature. Offhanded comments like that one you just said before are not helpful. Yeah.
So let's talk about what you should be saying. Linda, you raised one of our favourite points, which is active listening. I should say your favourite point. I'm still working on that. You talk about it really well all the time.
Don't worry, I have to work on it too.
Active listening. The other thing that you have spoken about in quite a lot of our conversations are open-ended questions.
Yes.
And I think that is what promotes a really good discussion. So oftentimes when you are the initiator of the conversation and the other person's not really sure what to expect or trying to control their reaction,
yes,
they say nothing. They sit there.
Yes.
And you find yourself filling the space, which as accountants, we're not too bad at, because we're used to talking at clients, and it's learning how to speak with clients that is a skill that we all need to develop. Yes. So I think open-ended questions are really helpful and effective in difficult conversations, because someone might go, but blah, 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 blah. And it's not like, well, that's not what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. You could say, well, how can I understand that a little more from your point of view? Because I'm not exactly understanding that right now. Yes. Or what's at stake for you here? Yes. What involvement have you had? What involvement would you like to have? How is this conversation going for you? Even if they're just not saying anything, you're not getting anything out of them.
Absolutely.
What would help us get to a resolution here?
Yes. So I would,
when you buy a new car and they say, what would get you in this car today? It's like that.
It is.
What would help us get to an outcome here? What's it going to take? Where do we need to go? Sorry to interrupt you, Linda.
No. So that's taking that very collaborative approach again, or what I call using a coaching style or coaching methodology. And it's very much about asking questions. And, that's something I teach every single day, with regard to doing business advisory and conversations with clients. But, the same style and the techniques used with that just help you in a plethora of situations that you'll find yourself in throughout your career, throughout your profession. And those open-ended questions are the thing. I think we've been almost conditioned as professionals to have the answers, that it all rests on our shoulders. That would be a great tip, actually. Let's just get rid of that, take that off, because you know what? You actually don't have all the answers. And we actually need other people and these collaborative conversations, solution-focused conversations to actually help us come up with, maybe a better answer. Just because you are the leader or the owner or the manager in this situation doesn't mean you've actually got the right answer. So ask. And I think, there's been this almost chip on our shoulder that we should know. Why should we know? I don't think we should know. We can't know everything, and we can't know everything about everyone or every situation. So let's ask. So some of the great questions that often they'll start with why. Explain to me why you feel this way. Explain to me why you think that's happening. And it's very much explain to me, help me understand. And so it's coming very much from fill me in here. So that's saying, I actually don't have the answer. Let's talk about it. I'm really interested in what you've got to say. And then it's employ that active listening to actually listen to what they're saying, not thinking about the next points that's on your dot points to talk about. Because something really cool might come out of that you never even had an appreciation of. And you might be dealing with a situation that's part of a bigger, more toxic thing that you didn't even realize was there.
Absolutely. What a great conversation. This hasn't been difficult at all today.
It hasn't at all. I hope we've given some great comments about things. I think this is absolute gold in this one. Isn't it funny? It's sometimes the conversations that we have, Kylie, that we think, oh yeah, this is going to be quite run of the mill, and all of a sudden they turn out to be absolute gems. And I think this one has been one of them. So I hope everyone's enjoying it.
I agree. Well, you know what, Shazeba, hope I've said that right, over in the room chat in Clubhouse has perfectly summarised our conversation for us. So thank you so much for that. You're doing a great job. I'm going to read out just the 5 things that he has summarised. He said, begin with the end in mind, control your emotions, try avoiding attacking personality, timing of the conversation is so important, and seek first to understand. Love that summary of our discussion this morning. Thank you so much for doing that over there in the room chat. Really appreciate it.
You're almost like our little personal chat GPT this morning, Chizova. Thank you so much. That's an awesome summary, and thank you for listening in to us. And that's been great. So I think also too, with these difficult conversations, if we actually think about it, most of them actually can be turned to a very calm, positive, solution-focused style. And I think that comes back to that rule number 4, preparation. Let's just give ourselves just a little bit of time, not a long period of time where we're putting these things off, but enough time for us to just process in our mind what we're going to say, what might happen, how might we diffuse a conversation, what are some of the questions that I could ask. Please help me understand, explain that to me, those types of things. Put them down on your jot points on your little summary before you go into a meeting or a conversation. That will all help. And, I think, again, it's stick to the facts. We don't need any personal confrontation here. That's not what these things are about in a workplace environment, certainly. Kyelie, any other closing comments from you?
My closing comment would be, when we're thinking about having difficult conversations, we have 2 choices, do something or do nothing.
Yeah.
And if you choose to do nothing, at some stage, the risk is that it might erupt, and that will not be your desired outcome. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people try and put this off, but that is my point. Think about it. You've got 2 choices.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And of course, the Public Practice Accountants Club is a monthly room. So we're here every first Wednesday of the month. So pop it in your calendars. A nice reminder for you to tune in and listen to Kylie and I gabble away on certain different practice management topics and everything affecting public practice. But next month on Wednesday, the 6th of September at 7 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, we'll be chattering. We do chattery, don't we?
Well, we will chatter.
Yes, chatting about mastering meetings, particularly the virtual etiquette edition. Now, I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time in meetings and a lot of time in virtual meetings, and it drives me absolutely bananas when people just, when they get off track, they waste time, they do a whole lot of things that really just annoy me, and to be honest, it makes me question their professionalism. So I think there's a lot in this that we can just really sweep under the carpet and not think about how important it is. So that's what we'll be talking about.
I think that anyone that sits in virtual meetings of any sort, Zoom, Teams, Google Hangouts, whatever happens, come and listen to this conversation, because I am going to give some specific examples and the consequence of those examples. So
we definitely both have them. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We hope you've enjoyed the room this morning, and we look forward to catching up with you again. Have a wonderful day, wonderful week, wonderful month, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.